Welcome to the Cool Fireman Podcast, a virtual firehouse kitchen table with What's a Rolfie, Unkie, Fireman 1231,
East Coast Kellys,
JDB Cubed, and Fireman Freddy. Let's get to the show.
Or the Cool Fireman Podcast gear, located at thecoolfireman.com.
We're doing something different, though, this time. We're going to say this is the Cool Fireman Podcast, brought to you by Unkie's Seasoning. Unkie's Seasoning. That's right. You heard that correct. The man, the myth, the legend, Adam McCoy is one of our most favorite co-hosts of the Cool Fireman Podcast, and he just so happens to be here today.
Thank you. Suck it, Doug.
Adam. We've been talking a lot behind the scenes about how much Unkies means to us. And we want to make sure that we give you all the love that we can on the podcast. And I think everybody knows we mention Unkies quite a bit on the podcast. But we are brought to you by Unkie Seasoning. So go out and get yourself some Unkie Seasoning today. In fact, I just did a recipe on TikTok and used your Coastal Cajun. Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
I just did a smoked beef stroganoff video.
Yeah.
All featuring Unkie seasoning, the buttery rosemary, chipotle, and garlic and herb.
Dude, that buttery...
I just ate some hamburger with salt and pepper.
You're so bland. Get yourself some Unkies. I know, that sounds...
Doug, you need some spice in your life. I got to tell you, hold on a second.
I need a lot
quick.
in my life.
Seriously, I was a sleeper on the chipotle, and I am living to regret that. The more I have tried it on different things, the more I'm loving it. So I got it. And I mean, Adam and I have been cooking and sharing stuff together for a long time. If you haven't bought the chipotle, you need to give it a try. Don't let the name fool you. Don't think it's so hot or so spicy. A little does go a long way, but it is phenomenal on all things red meat. I'm finding that out.
Yeah.
So there.
That's why I was originally called beef ring.
Yep.
It's fantastic on beef. And Matt, you all learn how to cook frog legs?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I need to learn. No, actually, I was at work and I get this phone call and Kelsey's freaking out. You won't believe what I just saw. I said, what is going on? Relax. And she said, there was a frog in the garage and it was staring at me. I don't know if it's dead or alive and you need to take care of it when you get home. And I was like, okay.
All right.
Okay.
It's going to be taken care of when I got home.
So I came home and it was actually pretty big. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh, it had full rigor and everything. It was in like the Superman pose. You know, it was like dun 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 super frog. And I was like, all right, I'll take care of it.
Big jump.
But I couldn't not take the opportunity to make a little video with the frog on TikTok. So I was gonna throw some monkeys on it and just give it a whale, but
you get the skin off and then you batter them and fry them, and then they taste like chicken. They look like the little chicken drumettes.
Only one problem. It's only one problem.
Bone.
It's on the bone. I can't.
Well,
I got a great recipe that you don't have to fry it. You can just grill it, and it just takes seconds to cook it.
Okay, but where do I buy a frog to cook?
You get
out there. I don't know.
I found out
H Mart. Go find H Mart.
I live in California. Well,
go to Asian market.
Yeah, I was gonna say H Mart is like the Asian market of the East Coast. So you could probably find one.
We have Asian
over there. It's probably called the C Mart or something. I don't know.
We have Asian markets. We could do that. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll do that.
I'll get you the recipe.
Yeah, give me a recipe. But for now, today we wanted to have Nick on because Nick is one of the only ones. I think Brian, you said that you do a little bit of volunteering, right?
Yeah, it started. In fact, I owe my fire service career to the volunteers. I started in 1998. My work is a little bit different. I serve in a different capacity. I'm not responding to calls like Nick. I help administratively in my volunteer department, but I'm still on the roster, and I still wear that proudly. I wish I could schedule fire calls, but I can't. And, I think we're going to talk about that, of how volunteer departments are combating the craziness of life to make sure that their communities are still covered. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I've always heard since I started 20 years ago in the fire service that 80% of the whole entire nation is volunteer firefighters. But I'm in California, and so we don't have a ton of volunteer work that's done, that I know of. But I started out as a volunteer with a pager. We had 3 kind of different tiers. We had, I was on more of the EMS squad. And so what would happen, we would be attached to an engine. If the engine went out, we'd get a page. We'd respond to the fire station. We'd get like $8, whatever. And then, if another call went out, I think it was $5 actually, another call would go out, then we would run that call. And if the engine came back and went into service, we'd go home. So that was kind of our deal. I did that for 5 years. It was a good experience. Went through a lot of training, a lot of classes to do that, which was fun and a good start to the career. But for the most part, the volunteer stuff that I know in the fire service on the West Coast is kind of a stepping stone. And I don't want to make that sound bad. It's just what I know. A lot of guys get into volunteer work in order to get experience to work as a career firefighter, and something that they can make money and support their family. So that's kind of where I came from. 5 years of doing that. Plus,
and I think the profiles across the country are all unique when it comes to the volunteer fire service. I mean, there are, you talked about that. I think a lot of the driving force is what the communities can afford. And excuse me, I think your exposure is because of the population that you're around. I mean, you're not far, LA County, right? Like you're in it and around it. So obviously the population demands that level of service. Same thing with where Doug is, Chesterfield County. How long ago did that switch? Do you even know, Doug?
I don't know. To full-time paid career?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Recruit School 1 would have been 45, 50 years ago, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So, I mean,
maybe more.
You're looking at all that. I will tell you, the community in which I'm in 1998, when I joined, there was no paid staffing at all in the volunteer firehouses. I can remember leaving work as a freshly graduated, high school, fresh firefighter. And luckily, my boss at the time, she was a volunteer in her community. She wasn't anymore, but she understood. And so I can remember going and leaving work and responding to fire calls, not clocking out. The company still agreed to pay it. And I worked in the city and drove back out. And so huge response times, but that's what we did to cover it. Now the community profile is a little different where I'm at. We have paid part-time staffing. We're not staffed 24 hours a day, but from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., it fills that gap in the volunteer firehouses. Who does that? Who does that work is a lot of our career firefighters. And I think that what I'm concerned with, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but I think maybe we could close the conversation here on the channel, is the issue that I see with it is you have a career firefighter who gets off of their 24 or their 48, and then they go work at a volley house to provide coverage. Burnout is going to be a huge issue. We talk about now about 30 years and the traumatic exposure that people see. If you live there all the time and all you do is go home to sleep, and maybe every once in a while you catch a weekend at home when you're not on duty, burnout is going to happen so much faster. And if we want to talk about, recruitment and retention on another episode, that's a reality, right? And so communities need to address that. One of the things that we're seeing here in the state, I'm seeing as the president of the Fire Marshals Association, is some OSHA mandates. And so the OSHA mandates are driving volunteer fire departments to comply with the same OSHA mandates as career departments. And so where they were trying to balance out saying, hey, I'm going to pay for an engine or whatever, now they're having to say, well, I can't pay for the engine, I've got to put staffing, or I can't do staffing, I've got to buy an engine. And so all that being said, going back to, like I said, when I started, it was a stepping stone for me, but for me personally, I felt obligated to stay on that department as a way to say thank you for the career that it gave me. And that's kind of what's kept me going. Even when I couldn't respond, I still said, give me something to do. So I serve as their public information officer. I handle the relief fund in North Carolina. We have what's called the Firefighters Relief Fund. So a portion of insurance money goes, and in the event of a hardship, scholarships, that kind of stuff. I squeeze that in at about 5 o'clock in the morning before the family gets up on Saturdays. It's my little way of giving back every week, so to speak. And that's it. They may not see me for 2 or 3 months, but the young bucks, some of those who are getting out of the Marine Corps that want to step into that career transition, I think it's there. My fear is the same for the volunteer fire service as it is for the career fire service, is having somebody that's right seat ready. I put my chief hat on here for a second and I say, if we don't have sustainability and long-term planning, we're going to run out. These people, I don't want to say they're going to die out, but they're going to retire out as volunteers and as career members, and that right seat is not going to be ready when it comes to experience and training. So it doesn't matter to me, volunteer or paid. We don't have the people to do the situational command experience that we need. I know that was a mouthful, but that's kind of my concern. But I think the profile is everywhere. And I've got a resource if you want to know more about it. NVFC, which is the National Volunteer Fire Council, is a huge resource for everybody. In fact, the U.S. Fire Administration has understood the critical challenge that you mentioned. 80% is volunteer. And so with that, they are offering FEMA grants to try to find people in their community, to look at diversity and inclusion, to make sure that those boots are full, because they understand that, well, I'll be blunt in saying it. If they are having to pay for firefighters without putting the tax burden on something else, they're cutting another form of government. They're cutting another service. And so if volunteerism can take its place, it's good to do that. The question is how and when and, by what means.
And doesn't North Carolina offer some kind of like retirement or something?
Yeah. So yeah. So we have the pension fund, and that's for career and volunteers, but it's after 20 years of service and age 55, you put in $10 a month. And I think right now it's around $157 a month, maybe more. Don't quote me on that, but that's from age 55 until you die. And if you have a line of duty death, whoever you name as your beneficiary will get that until they die, which doesn't seem like a whole lot. But if you look at it at $10 a month, you're only putting in a little over $2,000. You get that back in the first 2 years. Everything you invested over those 20 years, you get back in the first 24 months. And then the rest of it's gravy for the rest of your life. But, that relief fund, something we did at my volunteer department, and we also have it at my career department, we're able to supplement retirement using that. So a portion of our insurance money comes back to us, and it's capped. The legislature said, hey, you're sitting on all this cash. What are you going to do with it? Because it's statutorily and legislatively says you can only spend it on these certain things. So everybody was sitting on all this cash. And so what they did was they allowed them to create retirements accounts. So as like the president, not the president, but the chairman, me and my board, what we said was, all right, we're going to take all this money that's above the cap and put it into a savings account. And then every bit of interest that earns that year, every living member who gave more than 20 years of service and is age over 55, they're going to split the interest among them. So when times are good, they get a decent check. When times are not so good, they get a mediocre check. But as every year, as we don't use that money, the pot always grows. And so the years are even better than the year before, even if the recession's bad, because it's a bigger pot, if that makes sense. And so what I tell people is if you've thought about volunteering or you have any questions, you need to ask about those benefits. It's not about I lay my head down and I know I did right today kind of thing, because, people who are listening are already firefighters. It's about those other tangible benefits. When you look at your son or your daughter or your wife who says, Dad's gone again, or Mom's gone again, what is it? It's the comparisonness of knowing that you helped your neighbor. Our tagline at my VFD is neighbors helping neighbors. That's our tagline. And I put it on every single one of the posts that we share. And what really hit home to me, we've had that tagline for a lot, but my assistant chief right now, he was deployed. He was a Marine. He was deployed. We responded to his house. And when he came back, he said, I felt obligated to be trained and ready to respond for the other fellow Marines who were in the same boat I was while I was gone. Somebody came to my aid when I couldn't do it. I'm the head of the household. I had to have it protected. And so if it's not career, if it's not a paid person, then I am obligated to fill those shoes. If I'm willing to defend America and take a bullet when I'm away, I should be willing to do some form of civil service back to my community. And he's joined, he's retired. He's been probably close to 20 years on the department, all because we went for a smoking belt on his AC unit. So props to Billy, if I can shout him out. So
shout out, Bill.
Shout out, Bill.
Damn. I volunteered in a regular city, and our volunteers, we actually had a volunteer fire department. Even though our city was paid and fully staffed, we staffed the city of Chesapeake. We staffed Marine One. We raised the money and bought the city's first fire boat. And it was a nice big boat. It wasn't no Carolina skiff or nothing. It was, something you see out in the bays and the harbor. But for us to have that, the city guys, if we were unable to respond on it, the city guys were able to jump on it and take it. So when I first got in, we had it. I mean, we had the old pagers with just the numbers, and our whole responsibility was to be, if you were the first volunteer on it, is to start it up and pull off away from the dock and sit and wait until more volunteers showed up. Do not let the pay guys on, because they would take stuff, they would break it. They didn't know how to drive. They weren't trained on it. They wouldn't train on it. Then our captain of the volunteers sold it to the city for a job and a promotion, and became a lieutenant really quick with the city of Chesapeake when his brand new job. So we lost that status of volunteers because we had no equipment. So we went to auxiliary, and there's about 15 of us in a department of 400 paid people. So we were allowed to ride third on ambulances. If you're on the EMS program, during the fire, you can ride fifth. And that depends on certain trucks that had the room. There was actually 2 trucks that only had 3 people on it, but 4 seats. And actually, both their trucks had 6-seaters. So if one went down because of staffing, and me and my buddy, which is a fire marshal with them, we'd be nuts to butts. I mean, knees and each other's growing, 6 people on a truck. And that was the funnest time as a volunteer.
Did you say
4 paid guys as a volunteer.
What did you say, Doug?
Yeah, growing. Your legs were interlocked. My knee against your bulge. You're growing.
Growing.
I understand. I'm laughing at the way you said growing.
Oh, this is the word of the week. Growing. Say it. Growing.
Growing.
I know. I sound like I'm saying I'm growing tall.
Yeah, right. Okay, never mind. I got to look. I was like, did he just say growing?
All right, so, Matt, how do you pronounce it?
Growing.
No, I finally got one right.
Growing.
Okay. Growing. Okay.
Not
send that down the pike.
Yeah.
That's the word of the week.
So obviously, Brian, that was a lot, right? You touched a lot of subjects that we could have an entire podcast on.
Yeah.
Right seat ready.
I'm bad for that. I know. I dump truckload in the front yard, and then I pull away. I'm like, I see.
It's okay. We've had multiple people. We've had multiple people.
So many pauses.
Who's this new Brian guy? Because he's amazing. So everybody loves your takes, and I do too, and I know everybody else does. And so it's a good conversation. So I'm sitting here listening. I'm like, gosh darn, how do I want to respond to this? And right seat ready, that's a whole podcast, because I truly believe it. We have a lot of, I'm going to use a big word here for us, attrition, with the baby boomers that are retiring. We've got massive retirements. We only have 37 firefighters in our fire department, and we've hired 12 in the last 2 years, an entire shift. I mean, our firefighter rank is right. We have 12 firefighters, 12 engineers, and 13 captains, because we have an admin captain. But we've hired an entire shift, an entire firefighter rank in the last 2 years. And we have more people retiring in the future, very near future. And so those 2.5 year firefighters are having to take the engineer exam so we can keep the gosh darn department running. And now things are good right now with everything, at least on the West Coast. And so what are we talking about? We're talking about, we just did a standards of coverage report for our city, and it came up with 4.0 staffing, NFPA standards. And so we're pushing for 4.0. We have 3.0 staffing right now, just a captain, engineer, and a fireman. And we're like, we're going to add 3 more firefighters or 6 more firefighters to the ranks. It's insane how fast, these guys are just going to have to, I mean, for me, myself, I'm a captain. I've only been on for 11 years. So kind of have to man up, but that's a whole podcast about talking about how we're getting ready for all that kind of stuff,
Yeah. Hey, real quick, I want to go back to your comment about California. Real quick, I want to give you a stat.
Don't let me forget, because I got one more thing I got to say about California, about volunteers. Go.
28% of California is all volunteer. 25% is mostly, 15% is mostly career, and 29% is all career.
Okay.
So
so with that,
it's just surprising. Yeah,
I'm just telling you, I've been sitting here listening to you guys, and you're kind of confirming my suspicion as to how volunteerism works in different parts of the country. And in California, this is just from my experience. Northern California does things a heck of a lot different than Southern California. And so I'm not incorporating them. I don't know much about it. That California wants to break off into 2 pieces and be 2 different states for a reason. And that probably includes fire service. But as far as volunteer firefighting in California, so I heard you, Brian, say I felt a need, or I felt like I wanted to do something good for my community, an obligation to help my community. I'm going to tell you right now, I've heard it from multiple members. Hey, we should restart our reserve program, which is our version of a volunteer firefighter. That firefighter supplements our 3.0 staffing, and we become 4 on certain days. And we look at it as like we are giving back to the fire service, if you will, as a city, saying, hey, we need somewhere where these new firefighters can come and learn before they're getting paid full and they're running into the burning building by themselves. They need to come learn about the fire service culture in the stations and how to act as a firefighter, see if they even like it. We're going to see traumatic stuff. Maybe they don't like it, and then they can go on their different path if they don't. And so our culture is more of, there's that big C word. I always try to sneak it into every podcast. Our culture is like,
it's not the other C word.
You son.
Capitalism.
Yes. Yeah. So like we look at it as like giving back
letters
to the fire service. It's like, oh, we need to restart our reserve program to give back to the fire service. So allow these kids to come in and hang with us. Whereas you guys are like, well, no, I got to get back to my city. I got to get back to where I live and help out, And so I don't know. It's a finicky line. And so when I started as a volunteer, it had already kind of transitioned. But before I got on in 2005, from like the 80s or whatever until then, the volunteers had their own engines. And so they would show up, they would go interior, they were ideal age, all this kind of stuff. And in Orange County specifically, from what I know, because that's where I grew up in the fire service, they started to kind of tamper that, and they started taking things away. And why? Because of politics, because of what we were talking about off the record. And it's kind of like, hey, we don't really want these guys
saying, ruin everything.
We can do your job, for free or whatever it is, So that became a big political issue. But at the end of the day, it's, they're supplementing, but there's a fine line. There's a fine line. And, so.
Well, I think what you said was key is you have to do that. You have to do that assessment and say, what is the community okay with? Right. What is the demand for service? Because with population creates a higher demand and a higher expectation, right? Think about the current state of EMS in this country. It's not okay to wait 45 minutes when you're in a cardiac emergency. It's not okay. And they're in EMS as a whole is in a little bit of a nationwide cardiac crisis, if you will, of their own.
Big time.
Right? Like they are in that. And so
much less volunteer EMS.
Right. Right. Our volunteer EMS in our community went away several years ago because their percentage of non-response was well over 80%. They were not responding to 80% of their calls because we had a paid system to do it for them. Right? Think about that. If you have a paid system to take its place, why would you do it? And I think that part of the problem, and this is just Brian Kelly speaking for Brian Kelly, is if you create a mechanism for people to volunteer, they will do it. If you create no structure and a place to hang out, well, then what have you got? Well, you got a Cool Fireman Podcast club hangout is what you got, right? But the people who come to volunteer want the same structure of a career house as they do a volley house, right? Or vice versa. They want it. They need it. In fact, it's demanded. Heck, it's expected. The person who's calling 911 is expecting the same level of service. They may not understand it, but that's what they're expecting to show up. And so I think that part of that is the lack of strategic planning, right, that a lot of the volunteer departments are not doing, and that's not for any other reason than bandwidth, right? If you're not ready to ride the right seat, you probably aren't prepared for questions like, hey, what's your long-term plan for air pack replacement, station, engine, what do you need a ladder in your community? How about ISO? All these things, right? They're like, man, I joined 4 years ago and now I'm the fire chief, right? Like that's where it is. And so, they're basically getting done with engineer status and they haven't taken their officer 1, let alone their officer 3.
Everything that you're saying I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm going to say this, like, I'm extremely proud of where I've grown up in the fire service, because what you're saying is 100% correct. Our community demands it. In fact, our community doesn't know the difference between a reserve firefighter and a career firefighter. Yes. We show up typically wearing the same uniform, if you will. They don't, we'll show up with private ambulance companies that are contracted through cities, and they'll call them paramedics. I worked minimum wage. I made $7.50 an hour working on a private ambulance company back in 2006. And I would show up first because we beat the engine for whatever reason. And they would say, hey, the paramedics are here. Why did the fire truck show up? And right. I'm like, hey, I'm a BLS, EMT, and you're waiting for your paramedic services on the engine. And they just don't understand that, because they just expect that the best is within 10 minutes of them. And I'm very proud of the fact that everywhere that I've grown up, that I know, from LA County all the way to San Diego, up above that, again, I'm not too privy, but I'm very proud. I mean, that's our expectation, is that you're going to get a fire engine code 3 within 10 minutes and an ambulance code 2 within 15. And that's, I don't know, the training and the expectation that goes along with that is, it's pretty significant, to be honest.
So one thing I want to say, Matt, you may not be privy, but you sure are pretty. Second thing, what you're talking about is like that. Y'all have probably seen this meme or whatever goes around. It says, when Nancy calls 911 at 10 p.m., she expects a brain surgeon and a rocket scientist and all this and this and this and this to show up, not 4 schlubs in turnout gear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but with that said, I'm not a schlub, by the way. They might not expect exactly what you just said, but they expect somebody that's going to be able to answer all their gosh darn questions.
Right. That's what I was getting at. They expected a subject matter expert on everything in the world.
Yes.
Well,
very much so.
And not us 4 schmucks.
And that's right. Not us 4 schmucks.
We show
I do want to say, though, I know, and I can count probably, I could rattle off at least 3 or 4 departments that if you walked in them today, and when I say departments, they're volley departments that would just go tit for tat for any career department. Whether 100%. It's on call status, they have them in the station. The station is, staffed. It's ready to roll. It's heck, one of them is an internationally accredited fire department. They've gone through the whole standard of cover. They've done their risk assessment. They keep a certain level of staffing. They're evaluating everything to the molecular level, right? And we got career departments that don't even do that. They got a plan for emergencies that don't happen in their district. They've got a plan. And it's because they have taken their job as fire chief and as fire chiefs and officers of that department seriously. And I think that the difference with it is they had the long-term vision to say in those departments, the one that I know, is they said, this is changing and we have to be ready. I think the other thing I was going to say is what gets in the way a lot of these organizations is pride, right? When I was county fire marshal, I saw 3 of my 24 departments have to merge with other organizations because of pride. What do I mean by that? The insurance service organization came in, ISO came in, and they had to close. They couldn't respond. They were constantly having other stations cover for them. And so it was a huge problem. And when you sat down and you heard it, man, the empathy that they talked about, one of the proudest moments I ever heard from a person speak of was him and his dad sitting down. He was a career firefighter. His dad was not. His dad and his uncles in the community started this volunteer department when the volunteer department that I'm with actually took too long to come out in their community, and they said, this is not okay. We need to create a fire department out here to protect this community. The problem with that is, and not knocking him or anyone else, take him aside here for a second, this organization is that same mentality when times are tough and nobody's walking in the door, they say, I got it. It's okay. It's me. It's going to be me and my family. And they turn around and look and nobody's there with them because they didn't have a plan. And that's the problem, because the community still has the same expectations that you just said, Matt. But the problem is that they doesn't have the ability of the community to be behind him for that. And that's the problem. And so pride gets in the way a lot of times. And you could go to that same conversation about departmental culture. That's what kills a lot of career chiefs too, right? Their pride gets in the way. They don't have the ability to man or woman up and go sit down and say, you know what, that policy I wrote, it really wasn't a good decision. I'm sorry. I'm taking that back. I didn't think that thing through. And that's part of the problem. And so, the volunteer fire service as a whole, there are resources out there that NVFC, that National Volunteer Fire Council, holds, and there are grants for nationwide for them to fly you as an organization literally around the country for a weekend training on how to boost recruitment and retention in your communities. If I can find it, I'll drop it and we'll put it in the show notes for people to be able to go find it, but it's out there for people if they want it, and I think that that's the thing. And so the stats, I'm going to link this, U.S. Fire Administration to you. I'll drop that in the group chat, and you can link that in the story notes. But that statistic that I gave you is out there. And so as you look at how these states go, I was surprised Nebraska has the highest volunteer rate at 92%. 92% of Nebraska is covered by volunteers, with only 3.4% being all career. Now, I don't know what their population is. I'm not a historian, or what do you call that? Like a geography whiz. But that tells me that they're probably doing something right, or nothing's burning. And I don't believe the second one, right? I believe people are still dying of heart attacks. Things are still burning. Emergencies are still occurring. Cars are still wrecking. But Nebraska's probably doing something right, Mm-hmm. So either way, it's crazy stuff, man. 89% Pennsylvania. You look at them. It's amazing the numbers that are all over the place. So I'll drop that in the notes if people want to see how their state ranks to other states. And that same link will tell you how many departments are in that state. I mean, Texas has 1,524 registered fire departments in the state of Texas. North Carolina has 1,083. California has 850, but if you think about it, their counties are so big, they may have one department that's got 70 stations, right? Virginia has 556, right? So it's all there.
Just
but like
in
I said,
Orange County, there's just Orange County Fire Authority, which covers about 23 cities, is over 100 stations.
There you go.
Yeah.
So how big is Cal Fire?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I don't know how many stations Cal Fire is. It's gigantic. It goes all the way from San Diego all the way. I mean, the entire state. Sorry.
Doug, what would President Trump say? How big is it?
It's huge.
It's huge.
It could be the biggest of all time.
The greatest of all
Could
time.
be the biggest and the greatest of all time.
A boo.
But these data points are pretty amazing when you think about it. So
yeah. I mean, I kind of brought it up. I wanted Nick on here. He's a volunteer firefighter. He could kind of talk to it. Maybe one day he'll get on here and talk about it a little bit, and set us straight as far as, how his politics go and how they run their house. And what were you going to say?
I know we wanted to talk about like funding real quick. So a lot of people that may not be attached to a fire department may have that question about how do these organizations get their money. So just a couple of things to think about. There are departments that have fire tax, right? So a certain percentage of your property tax, if you look at your property tax bill, it'll say, hey, 3%, 7%, or 7 cents per $100, 15 cents per 100. Usually that's either by a county-wide fire tax district, meaning that the county commissioners will set a whole tax for the whole county for unincorporated areas, or it will be based off of each fire district based off of need. There's a couple of different ways here in North Carolina. Or the blend, like in my county, we're one of only 5 across the state. It's all general fund money, the same way that every one of a career department is funded. We submit a general budget to a board. That board then approves those expenditures, and then they, do it that way. And so it's a blend. But the one thing I want to stress more than anything to everybody who's listening is, if you are falling off, I got to give my department props for one thing here for a second. We still do an annual barbecue every February, March timeframe. And we do that as a homecoming. And I'm telling y'all, we sell over 1,200 plates of barbecue in about 2.5 hours. And we literally have a traffic jam. This year, it was literally gridlocked in front of the station. People couldn't get out. People couldn't get in. And so, I came in, I was like, this is a problem outside. As your PIO, we got to have a solution to this. But the beauty of that is the people in the community, and you can replace Farmer Jim that I'm fixing to talk about. We have old Farmer Jim. He'll come in with a country crock plastic tub, and he's got a $100 bill on it. He'll say, give me $100 worth of barbecue, right? That's what he does. He ain't looking for a tax receipt. He's not looking for anything. That's his way of saying thank you, right? That's his way of saying things. But I think why we do it is because that $5,000 we get that day, and I know that sounds crazy, but $5,000, that's a lot of money. But in the grand scheme of operating a fire department, it's so minuscule, right? It's not even fuel. It may be fuel for a month in today's time. I mean, it may be. What it does is it brings several hundred people into our fire station, right? And it gives us exposure that we would never have. And when we debriefed as a board after that meeting, and we said, man, it was so gridlocked, maybe we need to leave it. My fire chief, who is more of a political guy by savviness maybe than by tactical, and he can pump the heck out of a truck and he can fight fire, but he's kind of transitioned a little differently. He said, do you know what kind of exposure that brings to us? And it's almost like homecoming. You know how many older volunteers come back into that station? And y'all probably have it in your firehouse where you bring retirees back in, right? And you have your cooks and you have your breakfasts or, whatever, your awards. It's kind of like the same thing. It's like that annual homecoming where every year they come in and they sit down and they talk and they reminisce and they remember everything that it was for and, the why of all of these things. And I think that's the value in it. That's the value in those volunteering and those fundraising. So what I would say to those who are maybe trailing off on those and they have their funding mechanisms, don't stop doing those things, because that's the one that when they want to cut your funding, those are the same hundreds of people that will have a good percentage that shows up and says, don't take away their money. They need it, right? They need those life-saving dollars. Don't take it away. That's your cheerleading crowd. Right? So it's not about the 5,000. It's about the hundreds of thousands that we can get. So,
well, that was a good preach, dude. That was awesome. I think that's a good way to wrap up the podcast, to be honest with you. That was, we praise and volunteer firefighters. Gosh darn. It's like to take time out of your life and your family to volunteer, to do something for your community. Amazing. So unless you guys got anything else, I have one last thing before the end of the podcast.
All I'm going to say is the link to the American Red Cross is still in the queue. For those who are waiting to donate and who have been MIA on us on that, bear with us. We are getting a vanity link to American Red Cross. So it is coming.
That's what I was
you were
going to
going
end
to say?
with. Yes,
Okay,
because that's partially on me. I threw out a date in was it April 14th?
This past Sunday.
We had to back out on that. And so we're going to still do it. We don't have a solid date, but yes, like Brian said, we are coming up with a vanity URL that you're going to be able to go straight to American Red Cross through the Cool Fireman Podcast. We're going to tally everything together once we get that live TikTok virtual fill the boot date, which we'll put out on Instagram. So if you guys aren't following us on Instagram, please do. And we'll get that date out here as soon as I can. It's very tough getting all 6 of us together and to make a decision on a date that we're going to do. Literally just an hour before we started recording, we solidified this date that we were going to do this podcast. So it's been real hard. We're all got families and we all got full-time jobs and maybe even a side gig. We've all got side gigs and others on top of that. So please bear with us. I know that our listeners, we get such great comments and we get sidebar text messages from some listeners, and we seriously love doing this. And but it is on me. I put that date out. I apologize. But we are going to have that virtual fill the boot for American Red Cross. We've got that really cool. Brian hooked us up with that vanity URL, so you can just go straight through them and donate if you can't make the TikTok live, which will be on a certain date that we'll push out. But other than that, I think that's all we got, my friends. Until next week.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, without hearing anything, I think
Roll it, Gigi.
we're gonna
Roll it, Gigi.
Roll it, Gigi.
Before you leave, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give these firemen a huge thumbs up. Also, make sure you check out thecoolfireman.com for more. Thanks!